Hi folks, this is Karim Raouf from IT Visualizer channel. Today we'll continue our lab, the COVID-19 lab. This is the second video. We have been discussing in the previous video the following. Let's go there. Just a moment. Sorry. So we have been discussing in the previous video what is the Dart tools. We have said that Dart tools, it is a bunch of tools on a bootable DVD that Microsoft provide you, so you can fix Windows errors or Windows problems or corrupted Windows system or corrupted hardware issues. So it's a bunch of free tools Microsoft provide you to troubleshoot your computer. Okay, and this Dart bootable tools, you can get it from the Microsoft Desktop Optimization package. This is a DVD that Microsoft provides you if you have an acceptable or volume license from Microsoft. So from this Microsoft Optimization Package DVD, you can get the Dart 10 program, and through the Dart 10 program you can make Dart 10 bootable DVD. This bootable DVD, as I said before, contain a lot of programs that can help you troubleshoot your computer software and hardware issues. Software like Windows problems, or hardware like, for example, your hard disk, and so on. And we have discussed how we can make a Windows 10 Dart bootable DVD. We installed first the Windows 10 Dart program from the Microsoft Windows Optimization Package DVD, and then before installing the Windows 10 Dart program from Microsoft Windows Optimization Package DVD, you need to have a pre-installed programs or things, or pre-installed software. You need to install the Windows ADK, the latest Windows ADK, and something called Windows PE add-on. So you need to install these two programs before installing the Windows 10 Dart program. Okay, and you need also to install something called Windows SDK. Okay, so you need to install 3 programs before installing or running the Windows 10 Dart program, which through it we will make a Windows Dart 10 DVD bootable, or Windows 10 Dart bootable DVD. Okay, and why we need to install Windows SDK is something we need to be able to run one of the tools on Windows 10 Dart DVD. It's called Crash Analyzer. Crash Analyzer, it's a program that used to analyze the blue screen of death of Microsoft. We all know that the blue screen of death of Microsoft contains a lot of things and a lot of data and a lot of things written on it, and we cannot understand. So the Crash Analyzers or the Crash Analyzer analyze this data and put it in a readable way, so you can know what's happening exactly. Okay, and the blue screen of death, it happens when there is a fatal hardware issue or software issue. So the Crash Analyzer helps you to analyze the blue screen of death and gives you the exact cause of this blue screen of death. Okay, so after installing the ADK and PE and the Windows SDK, we install after it the Windows 10 Dart program, and then after that we use the Windows 10 Dart program to create a Windows 10 Dart bootable DVD. Okay, we have done all of this, and at the end we are using a program called Vintoy. Vintoy, it is a program that we will use to make a multi-bootable USB operating system ISO. So the Vintoy, it is a program. You burn it on a USB stick, and after burning it on a USB stick, you can put a lot of Windows operating systems and a lot of DVDs for different programs and operating systems on one USB, and then you can boot this USB and choose from it which operating system you need to install from a list in front of you. Okay, so this is very good to install or to make a USB that contains multiple boot USB operating system ISOs. Okay, so we have done this, and I showed you all how we can do this. And then after installing how you can make a multiple boot USB stick, you need first to have a USB that it is completely free, so you need to get all of the data from it, and then install the Vintoy program on it, and then simply you put all of the ISO images for different operating systems and softwares on this USB after installing the Vintoy program on it, and that's it. You just need to insert the USB in any PC, and then you will see a multiple list, or a list that contains a lot of entries for a lot of ISO images for a lot of software and operating systems that you have already put on the USB. So we have discussed this in the previous video. So we need to use this USB stick to boot from it, okay, and then install our desired operating system. Okay, so as we all know, we will use something called VM Workstation Pro. This is the hypervisor that we will use to create our virtual machines. Okay, so this is a virtual environment, and this is a program that creates a virtual environment of virtual machines and virtual networks. Okay, so we need to insert our USB stick after installing. First of all, we will create a new virtual machine, and then we need to insert our USB stick and then boot from it, and then choose from the multiple entries for the multiple operating systems to install one of them. Okay, we need to install the Windows Server 2022. Okay, so there is a trick here. You cannot, okay, boot from a USB stick, okay, when you are using the VM Workstation Pro program or the VirtualBox, not directly. So you need to do this in an indirect way. So how we can do this? This is a URL that tells us how to do it. We need first, what we need to do, we need, if we go and power on the virtual machine, so we'll create a virtual machine, and then when we tell him to power on to Frameware, this will go to the BIOS for this virtual machine. We can see here that there is removable devices. It doesn't contain anything, so you can't boot from removable devices when you are on a virtual machine, especially on VM Workstation Pro or VirtualBox. So how we can bypass this problem? What we will do, we will have a program called Plop Boot Manager. You will show you all. This is very famous program. You will just download it, search Google and something called Plop Boot Manager. This is a DVD, okay, you insert it, and then when you boot from it, it gives you an option to boot from USB or other devices. So this is an indirect way. You will have a DVD, you will insert it in the virtual machine, and then when this program boots, it will tell you to boot from different devices. One of them is the USB. Okay, I will show you all in practical how we'll do this, but there is one trick here. You cannot use this Plop Boot Manager with a BIOS system of EFI or UEFI. Okay, the BIOS system needs to be BIOS. Okay, the operating system or the BIOS chip need to be on not EFI, to be MBR, not EFI. Okay, so he said this boot manager is not compatible with EFI. You need to use BIOS instead, or what's called MBR. So you need to change the BIOS operating system from EFI to BIOS system. Okay, so we can be able to use the Plop Boot Manager. Okay, so what we will do, we will download the DVD, and then we will go and attach it. Okay, it's called Plop ISO, and then what you will do, there is two ways you can, if for example, if you don't need to occupy the DVD, so if you need to install, for example, an operating system in this DVD, you can add two DVDs, of course, or you can do another trick. You can add a floppy disk. So if, for example, you will not use the Plop Manager into the DVD slot, you can add something called floppy disk. So you can go and tell him to add a floppy disk, and then you can use the floppy disk to boot the Plop Boot Manager from it. Okay, so you can add the floppy disk and then add something called Plop IMG. This is it is with the downloaded files. So you will find something called plop.img and plop.iso. Plop.iso you can boot it from the DVD. As for plop.img, you can boot it from a floppy disk. So anyway, after inserting this DVD, you need to go to the Frameware or the BIOS of this virtual machine, okay, and tell him to boot from the legacy floppy disk. Or if you are using the floppy disk to boot your Plop manager, you need to make it the first bootable device, okay. If you are not using this one, then the CD-ROM is enough, it will boot from the CD-ROM, okay. And then you can tell him to exit and save changes, and then after that, when you boot, you will have something like this. It will get you to something called boot from floppy or CD-ROM or USB. When you click on this, after of course, before powering on the virtual machine or after powering on the virtual machine, you need to insert your USB, and then when it comes to this option, you need to tell him USB, okay, and then it will get you to the USB operating system. Here you can see that there is a lot of multiple entries in this something called Ultimate Boot DVD. So this is the way you can boot from a USB in an indirect way using the VM Workstation Pro. Okay, what about the VirtualBox? The VirtualBox, it's a little bit complicated also, but what we will do, first of all, we need to insert the USB stick, okay, in my laptop, and then tell him disk management, right click and then disk management. From the disk management, okay, you will see, for example, this is your removable USB, it's called disk 1. Remember, you need to know the number of the disk because we will do something with the number of the disk. So you insert your USB and then take the number of the disk, and then after that we will run a command, okay, from the VirtualBox to make this USB as a bootable hard disk. You all know that the VirtualBox needs a virtual hard disk so you can install operating system on it, or so you can use it. We will make a virtual hard disk from the USB, okay, and the virtual hard disk from the USB, it will be bootable. How we can do this? First of all, we need to insert the USB stick and then take the number, and then we will go to the command prompt and run as administrator, and then we will go to tell him go to the Oracle VirtualBox. So we have installed the VirtualBox. This will go to the VirtualBox directory, and then we will type this command. What we are telling him here to make this we tell him to make this USB, to make a hard disk from this USB, and it's attached to this USB. So the hard disk will be created from this USB stick, okay. So after telling him to do this through the command prompt, when we go and create, or we open the Oracle VirtualBox and then tell him to create a new virtual machine, we tell him to use an existing hard disk, the one that we have created before, okay, and when we power on the virtual machine, it will go directly and boot as if the USB is inserted in the virtual machine or in the VirtualBox. So in an indirect way, we are telling him or we are adding a hard disk that it is attached, or it is completely attached to the USB, or it's acting as the USB, okay. Someone tell me, what about I need to install the operating system? You can add additional hard disks. So you will add the first hard disk which is attached to the USB, and then you can add additional hard disk. On the additional hard disk you can install the operating system. So this is an indirect way to boot from a virtual environment like the VM Workstation Pro and the VirtualBox, to boot from a USB stick, okay. I will show you all practically how we can do this, but this is the way that we can do this. So let's begin and see how we can do this. So let's first go and open our VirtualBox, sorry, our VM Workstation Pro, and then we will create our first virtual machine. But before creating our first virtual machine, we need to see our virtual network. So we have PCs or virtual machines that will be created, but it should be created in a certain network, okay. So we will check now what is our virtual network that we will put our virtual machines in it, okay. So we will go to the edit and then virtual network editor. Here we can see that there is three types of network. There is VMnet1, this is the first virtual network, and then there is called VMnet8, which is another virtual network, and something called VMnet9. There are three types of virtual networks. The first one, it is an internal network. Which I mean by internal network, I mean that there is no internet access, so it's a network only for PCs to communicate with each other, and there is no external access to the internet. Okay, VMnet8, it is a virtual networks that allow PCs to communicate with each other, and it goes to the internet, and it let them access the internet. Okay, as VMnet9, it is host only. This is the same as VMnet1. This is a virtual network for PCs to communicate with themselves only, and not to get access to the internet. We will use this one, which is VMnet8. We will make PCs communicate with each other and get to the internet, and the subnet or the network will be 192.168.1.0. so this is our network, and our first domain controller will have an IP of 192.168.1.10. okay, so we can see the setting of this virtual network. First we need to change the setting. I will show you all the setting of this virtual network. So here we can see that there is something called VMnet0. This is bridged. It's like you are using the network or the network card of your laptop. It's directly linked to your network card, so your virtual machine will use the same network card of your laptop, okay, and the same IP address, so IP address range of your network or your laptop. So this is bridged. As for the host, these two host type of virtual networks, you can put any IP address you need, but as for the bridged, you are restricted, or you are attached to the IP address that your laptop takes. Okay, if your laptop, for example, take certain IP address range, your virtual machines will take the same range of your laptop, okay, or your host. Okay, as for the host only, you can play with the subnet mask as you need, or the network as you need. As for the netting, you can also assign a certain address, okay, or network address, and in the same time you can get to the internet. You are not attached to your laptop IP address. You can give the virtual machines the IP addresses you need, and in the same time you can get to the internet without the need to have, or without the need the virtual machines to be having the same network range of your host. Okay, this is done automatically for you. Okay, but actually no, it's not done automatically, but you don't need to bother yourself with the IP address of your host. You need only to put the network address and then tell him the NAT process, and we show you all here. For example, it's tell him to connect a host virtual adapter to this network, and this is the subnet from 0 to, and the subnet is 255.25.25. and then we can see here, if we go to the NAT setting, so here we have the option. We can get a little bit further here, just a moment. So we go to the NAT. Here we can see that NAT shared host IP address with VMs. Okay, this is not exactly sharing the host of the IP address of the host, but here my host will act as a router. Okay, so here the virtual machines will consider my host to be the router. Okay, so for example, if my host router, or my host will be 192.168.1.2, so they will consider him as the router. Okay, or it will be considered as the gateway. Okay, not a router, as a gateway. So here we will put the IP address and the subnet mask, and then the NAT setting. Here we can see that this is my gateway. Okay, so my virtual machines will get to the internet through this IP address. Okay, and also my host will get internet through this gateway. So my host and my guest will get to the internet through this gateway IP address. So anyway, and by the way, I need to show you all something here. We don't use the local DHCP service to distribute IP addresses to VMs, so I don't need the VM Workstation Pro to distribute IP addresses to my virtual machines, because I will install DHCP later on one of my virtual machines. So we need to choose this network to any virtual machine I will create. So we'll attach this attach any virtual machine to this virtual network. Okay, then we'll create a new virtual machine. Okay, next, and then I will install operating system later, and then tell him I need to install Microsoft operating system. Here we can see that there is no Windows Server 2019 or Windows Server 2022. They're only the latest one, or the last one is Windows Server 2016. So we will choose Windows Server 2016. Okay, in VirtualBox there is an entry for Windows Server 2019, but here in the VM Workstation Pro, as it is considered the latest version, as I know it's 16.1, it doesn't contain the Windows Server 2019 operating system. And here there is the folder that will contain my virtual machine, and here I'll give it a virtual hard disk of 70 gigabytes. It's recommended to have 150 gigabytes for or you need to have the operating system for your virtual machine. If you have a machine that you install Windows 10, for example, operating system on it, the operating system need to be installed on a partition which is more than 150 gigabyte. Of course, if it is Windows Server, you need to have it more. Okay, but at least if you are installing Windows 10 operating system on a partition, this partition should be more than 150 gigabytes. And here I will play with the memory. I don't need to have it. I will leave the memory as it is. I will not give it two processors. I have 4 processors, so I needed only to take one processor. Okay, and then I will attach the network adapter of this virtual machine to the network of VMnet 8. Here I will make a mistake. I will connect it to VMnet 0, and remember, I need to have 2 network cards, okay, installed on this virtual machine, because later I will make teaming between them to act as one network card. And this is very useful. As I said before, it will be redundant and it will help you to have a backup. So if one of the network cards is down, the other will continue working and you will not lose the connection with your server and clients. Okay, so here we will edit, or here first we will add another network card. So here let's go further here. So here we will add again, we will open the virtual machine, and then we tell him add a network card, another network card. It's not VM0, it's VMnet 8. So we will add 2 network cards. Okay, and then we need to power on the virtual machine and see, after inserting the USB, of course I will show you all after inserting the USB, that it will not boot from the USB directly. And now we go to the options. Here in an option called shared folders, it is a folder that will be shared between my host and my guest, okay, or between my laptop and my virtual machines. Here I tell him to add this folder shared between my host and my guest, or my laptop and my virtual machines. It will be mapped as a network mapped drive. So here I will choose a folder that contains all of my scripts and all of my data. Okay, it will be shared between me and this virtual machine. Okay, and remember, we need to choose, or we need to change the BIOS system of this virtual machine to be BIOS, not EFI. Okay, so we need to change it for UEFI to BIOS. Okay, this is for our Plop manager to work. Okay, but I will show you all first when we power on this virtual machine. After inserting the USB, of course, it will not boot directly from this USB. Okay, this is the USB that contains all of the different ISOs, okay, that contain different operating systems and programs. Now we will power on the virtual machine, and then I will try to insert or attach the USB to this virtual machine from the icon at the end of here we can see there is an icon for the Kingston. Here we can see at the end we need to go to the icon of Kingston. This is my flash, not this one, the last one, and tell him to insert or attach this or disconnect this USB from my host and attach it to my guest or to my virtual machine. So here we'll go to this and tell him Kingston, okay, and then we tell him to connect, okay. So he will disconnect it from my laptop and insert it to my virtual machine. Now it is already attached to my virtual machine, but when I restart it, it doesn't do anything, or it doesn't boot from this virtual machine. So here we can see that it didn't boot even though it's already inserted. Okay, we can see here it is already there and I can't boot from it. So because there is no direct way to boot from a USB, okay, inside a virtual machine, okay. So here what I will do, I don't know, just a moment. So here we can go and check the BIOS and see our boot options, or we will just power on or shut down this one and see our BIOS or our boot order of this virtual machine and see if it will boot from a removable devices, okay. So this is the hard disk and this is the USB, and tell him to show all input of USBs. And then I think I will change the BIOS system, but not now. This is, I am just discovering the options of the this virtual machine. So here I am troubleshooting the issue because I didn't know the info that you cannot boot directly from a USB in a virtual environment. So here it still doesn't boot. Okay, so I will insert the USB again, okay, but it didn't work. So we'll insert the USB again, okay, but still it doesn't boot from the USB. So we need to go to the BIOS of this virtual machine and see the boot order. Maybe there is a problem with the boot order. I have already checked this, but this was not the issue. So anyway, we will power on or power off this virtual machine. Okay, we'll shut down and then we will power on to Frameware just to make sure that it will boot from the USB. So tell him to power on to Frameware, to go to the BIOS setting and see if it will boot. Here we can see that it doesn't boot, or we need to tell him to enter setup to see the boot order for this virtual machine. And here I will connect the USB, but here it's telling me it's unsuccessfully attaching it to my virtual machine. Anyway, when we enter the setup, okay, we will see that the boot order doesn't contain USB. Okay, so we will see this one here. I will just go a little bit further here, so we'll go to enter the setup. So again, so we tell him to enter setup and see what is the problem here. So go to the enter setup. Okay, and see here the boot order. So here we tell him to enter setup, okay, and tell him to configure boot options, here we can see that change boot order. Here we can see that it doesn't contain anything related to a USB, or it doesn't see my USB, even though was attached before, but it doesn't see it. Okay, and there is no option here to boot from the USB. So we need to go quicker here to go to 19. Just a moment. So here we'll go to we will quickly go to 19. Just a moment. So here we need to see how this will be done. So we'll go and shut down, and then we will change the operating system. Okay, so here this is the one that I am talking about, the URL that I showed you all how to boot using the Plop manager. So this is the one. We need to first change the Frameware from EFI to BIOS, so we can go there. Okay, and here is the website of Plop manager, so we will go and tell him Plop manager and search for it, and then install it, and I'll download it. This is Plop manager zip file. Here is the Plop manager, and then after that we will have two files. One is an ISO file and the other is .img. Okay, so what we will do, I will not use the ISO image and put it in my virtual DVD in my virtual machine. I will create a virtual floppy disk and insert the virtual floppy disk of the Plop manager in it. Okay, so here we will open it, and here we can see, let me show you all how this is done. So we will go and just a moment, let me go here a little second here. So no, just a moment. So we will go and add, so just a moment again. So we'll edit the virtual machine. Okay, and then no, I think I need to go further here. Okay, so here we will edit the virtual machine. Okay, here I have inserted the Plop manager as an ISO image. So here we have inserted it as an ISO image, and I need to change the BIOS from UEFI to BIOS. Okay, and then when we power on the virtual machine, okay, it will ask you, or it will boot from the Plop manager. And by the way, my USB was not inserted, but you need to insert it, and here we can see the option of booting from the USB. Okay, but what if you need to have your DVD clear, or you do not want to occupy it? So we will add a floppy disk. So here we will add a floppy. First of all, here I have added the USB, because here is telling me that he didn't find USB, and then I tell him to boot from USB again. Here he didn't find the USB. So this is, by the way, it's not a problem with the software, it is a problem with the USB stick itself, but anyway it will work. So what if you don't need to use the virtual DVD in this virtual machine? Okay, you need it to be not occupied. So we will add a floppy disk and boot this program from the floppy disk. So I'll show you all how to do this. We need to power off the virtual machine. Okay, so I need to power it. Here what I'll do here, I will add here, first of all, I will eject this ISO image. So here we will eject this ISO image. Okay, this is it. Here we will add a floppy disk. Okay, and finish, and then we will eject the ISO image of the Plop manager here. And the Plop manager has something called .img. This can be inserted in a virtual floppy disk. Okay, so we'll go to the Plop manager folder, and then we'll add the plop.img file. This can be booted from the floppy disk, and then we will eject the Plop manager ISO image from the DVD. This is a way if you need your DVD to be not occupied and you need another device, so you can add a floppy disk and boot the program from it. And then when we power on again the virtual machine, but before that we need to go in the BIOS, okay, and see if it is already the boot order from it. You can see that it will boot from the floppy disk. Here we will see when we tell him to boot on Frameware, here we can see that in the boot order here you can see in the boot order that removable devices, here it will see that it contains legacy floppy disk, so here it will boot from the legacy floppy disk. Okay, so now we can power on the virtual machine and see if it will boot from the floppy disk. Okay, so it will boot. Let me pass it real quickly here. So now it will boot from the floppy disk. So what we will do now, we will power on the virtual machine and we will see it will boot from the floppy disk and it will have the program appearing. So now we will tell him to exit and save changes, or exit saving changes, and then we will begin and we will see that it will boot from the floppy disk. Okay, here we can see that it is already booted. Here the same program booted from the floppy disk, and when I insert the USB, okay, it will not see it. But anyway, this is a problem. The USB, as I said before, not the program itself. It will work with you because it has worked with other USBs before. Okay, so anyway, just a moment. So here we can see that I have inserted the USB, but anyway, when I try to boot from it, okay, so you have to boot from floppy or CD-ROM or USB. When you tell him USB, it tries to search for the USB, but at the end it tells me that it didn't find USB, try again. So this is how we can boot from a USB device. Actually, it didn't work with me, but it will work with you. There is a problem in my USB, but it will work. So now let's go and begin creating. We have created our first virtual machine. We need to install Windows Server 2022 on it and promote it to be or install Active Directory tools or services, and then promote the server to be a domain controller. So let's begin and see how this will be done. So here, let's go and see. So here, just a moment. So here now we will edit the virtual machine, okay, and then we will add the ISO image for the Windows Server 2020 or 2022. Okay, okay, and there it is, Windows Server 2022. This is still a preview, so it's not a final product, but we are testing it to see the different new options in it. Remember, this is not VMnet 0, it's VMnet 8. Okay, we need to change it, and I'll change it later. So here we have booted our Windows Server 2022 ISO image, and then, but before that, remember that this the BIOS system, we need to change it from BIOS to UEFI, because I need it to be UEFI and to have it as secure boot. Okay, or you can leave it UEFI, but we will change it back, and then okay, we will see if we can install the operating system on this virtual machine, although its operating system is UEFI. Before that I have problems with this, okay, but now it is working. Now we can see that it is boot from DVD. Okay, and then we will begin installing the Windows Server 2022 operating system. And remember, the first thing to do after installing any operating system on a VM Workstation Pro virtual machine, you need to install the Vmware tools. These are tools to be installed on the VM Workstation virtual machine that increases the compatibility between the host and the guests and increase the performance of the virtual machine and do a lot of things. So it's very important to install the VM tools after installing the operating system on a VM Workstation Pro virtual machine. It also contains a lot of things. It, for example, include display drivers, a lot of things. Here it is asking about a serial to activate this this version, and I will show you all. I have already the serial, or it will be in a Google Drive link anyway, so I will get the serial Windows Server 2022. Okay, and then this is the serial, and then we have standard edition and we have the data center edition. So data center edition, it's contain more options and it is mostly used in production environment. If you don't have much money, or for example you can use the standard edition or the server standard edition, it is enough. But if you need more options, the data center will be your choice. Here we will choose desktop experience because the other option of data center, this will not have a graphical interface. It will have a command prompt, only black screen. You can manage the windows using the command prompt. There is no graphical interface. As for the desktop experience, it have the normal graphical interface we all know. Okay, so we will choose this one. Okay, but in a more secure environment, maybe using the first one will be the ultimate or the preferable choice. Okay, so here we tell him accept the license agreement, next, and then install custom, and then here we will partition our hard disk to two partitions. The first will be 60 gigabyte and the other will be 10 gigabyte. As I said before, it is the best practice to have the operating system partition to be more than 150 gigabyte. This is for Windows 10. As for Windows Server, it should be more than that, and then we will have another partition. Okay, and we will format it as an NTFS. This is the D partition. I will format it as NTFS, and then we will tell the Windows to install its operating system on this 58 or 60 gigabyte partition. Now we will wait until the installation is finished. And the first thing that you will encounter after installing the operating system is to put a password for your default Windows local administrator account. You will put a strong password, and remember to change the name of this Windows local administrator from administrator to any other thing. Okay, and as I said before, we will put a strong password and then we will disable this account completely. Why we are doing this? Because most of the hackers know that there is a local administrator account called administrator, and most of us doesn't put a strong password on it. So we will put a strong password, and then we will rename this account from administrator to any other thing, and then we will disable it completely, and we'll make another account with a completely different name that have the same privileges as the administrator. How we can do this? By putting our newly created local account in the administrator's local group in the Windows. Okay, so let me show you all when it comes, but this is what we will do. So here I'm just checking my host, RAM and processor and hard disk, and remember, when you are using a virtual machine, the hard disk will be working a lot. Okay, so here my first note that the Windows Server 2022 is much more lighter than other Windows Server operating systems. So it's much lighter than the most of the Windows Server systems I have encountered. Here we will have our username administrator. We will give it a strong password. Okay, and as I said before, we need to change the username from administrator to any other thing and put the password and disable it. Okay, disable it, and then after that we'll make an account that will have the same privileges as the administrator with a completely different name, and it will have, as I said before, all of the privileges of the administrator, which is a complete control over the Windows operating system. Okay, and actually on the domain, if you have this server to be a domain, here we will install VM tools, or VM, as I said before, it's very important to install VMware tools on the newly created virtual machines in VM Workstation Pro, especially after installing an operating system. So here we will put the password. So here we can pass it real quickly. If we can go there furtherly, we can see it's much similar to Windows 10. Okay, and here I'm just going to personalize my desktop to add shortcuts of the control panel and my computer or this PC and a lot of things. So I need to do this just to make it more easier for me to access the options of Windows. So here we tell him personalize, and then we will add the different icons, and then we need to make network card teaming, okay, between the two network cards. So here we'll go to themes, okay, and then to desktop icons, and then begin adding the different icons on the desktop. So here we'll tell him desktop icon setting, and then we'll tell him to add my computer, user files, control panel, and network. All of this will be added to my desktop. Okay, so I can be able to access it, or to access the different options. And here is the server manager. From it we will change the name of this virtual machine and make teaming between the different or between the two network cards. Here we will have our VMware tools DVD, and we will install the tools of VMware from it. So we go and insert the VM DVD from the VM Workstation options, and then we will begin installing the VM tools. Okay, so now we'll go, see, we'll pin this to the taskbar, and then I will go to the local server, okay, and then begin changing or begin making network teaming between the two network cards. Here you can see that we have access to the internet from here. Anyway, so this means that it got an IP address, and this is not correct. I need to put static IP address to this virtual machine, so this is the wrong network. We will change it later. So here we are installing the VM Workstation Pro tools, and after installing the VM Workstation Pro tools, it will need to restart the virtual machine. So we tell him complete, and then next, and then install. It will not take so much time. You can see here it's installing different drivers. So you can see here, for example, that the screen resolution, it's not correct. After installing the VMware tools, it will install different display drivers that will change my display to the correct resolution. So this is one of the advantages of using the VM tools, okay, or VMware tools. Okay, it's installing drivers for mouse and a lot of things, and video driver. As we can see here, the screen will flicker, so this means that the video driver, it's already installed, or it is installing. We can see here that the screen is flickering, and then we will see that the resolution of the screen will be corrected, and it will be stretched, sorry. Okay, this is the correct one, and then it will ask us to restart a virtual machine, and this is correct. We need to restart the virtual machine, and then after that we will change the name of this virtual machine to our name that we need for our first domain controller, and we will assign a static IP address. Okay, so here we'll restart. Here I think, as I said before, we need to change the VM, okay, network from VMnet, or virtual machine for a virtual network, from VMnet 0 to VMnet 8. Okay, so here the virtual machine, it is already starting. It will take a little bit of time, but we can go quickly. So here we have begin, and then we open the server manager, then the local server, and then we will tell him to, first of all, we need to open the remote desktop option. This will enable us to remotely connect to this virtual machine from any part of the network. Okay, so this is good, and it will not allow anyone to remotely connect to this virtual machine, only certain users or certain group. Okay, so this is good because we will not be in the data center all of the time. We will connect to the server from our desktop or from our desk. Okay, so we need to open the remote desktop option. So let's continue, guys. Here we will begin changing the name of this virtual machine, but anyway, first we need to open the remote desktop. We tell him to allow remote connections, and it will be allowed to certain users or groups, and then we'll make network teaming between the two network cards. So we tell him enable network teaming, and then we'll choose the two network cards. It is the Ethernet 0 and Ethernet 1. When we make teaming between them, there will be one network connection that contains both network cards. Okay, so here we'll tell him, we name this teaming DC or anyway. So every card will have a network connection, and after teaming the two network cards, there will be a third network connection that will contain both network cards. Okay, so here we will name them, and remember to take a snapshot. This is like a backup from the virtual machine after making important changes to this virtual machine. This is to be in the safe side. If you don't need to, or there is a problem with your virtual machine or something happened to your virtual machine. And it is also best practice to every now and then to remove the snapshots, because there will be a lot of snapshots, but it's good to take and archive them and delete what is not necessary from these snapshots. Anyway, we will tell him this is the teaming, and you need to choose something from the teaming option. Okay, something called load balancing mode, something called address hash, because if you don't choose this option, the teaming will not complete. Okay, so this is a different kind of teaming, but anyway, we will leave everything to the default, but remember to change the load balancing mode from dynamic to address hash, because if you don't do this, the teaming will not be done. Okay, here we can see that it's saying that it's making the teaming. There is some errors, but at the end you will see that there is two green active icons, so this means that the teaming is done. Okay, So this is active, then the two network cards are teamed and they have 1 gigabyte speed. Another note that when you are working with Hyper-V environment, the network card's speed is 10 gigabyte. I don't know why it's 1 gigabyte in the VM Workstation Pro environment. Here we will change the name of the computer, okay, and okay, but here it will give us a general network error because after changing or after the teaming you need to restart and then change the name, okay. But another thing we need to take note, as I said before, that to put a static IP address, okay, this is one, and we need to change the network virtual network from VM0 to VM8. So here we will change it, or we take a static IP address because this will be a server, so it will be 192.168.1.10. this will be the IP address, and the subnet mask will be 255.255.255.0, and the gateway will be 192.168.1.2. remember this IP address from the beginning of the video, okay. So here we will put it the subnet mask, okay, and then we will put the gateway, and then okay, and then we'll restart, or we will shut down the machine and then change the name of the server, okay. So here you can see it is giving us another network. So if you go to the setting, we need to change of this virtual machine, need to change the network card from VM0 to VM8, okay. So this is the mistake that we have done. So we will power off the virtual machine and change the network card network or virtual network from VMnet0 to VMnet8, the one that we have configured from the beginning of the lab, okay. And after changing it, we will go and change the name of this virtual machine, okay. So we have the static IP address done, the teaming done, we need to change the virtual network of the network cards, and then we will change the name of the server. So we are preparing ourselves after all of this to add the Active Directory domain services and then promote the server to be a domain controller. Here we have powered down the virtual machine, and then we go to the first. Here I'm checking that I am using the correct virtual network. It was VMnet8. This is the one that we need to use. You can see the VMnet0, it's not the one that we need, so we will change it from VMnet0, okay, to VMnet8. So this is the one that we need, okay, and VMnet8, okay, and then okay, and then we will power on again the virtual machine, and then we will change the name of the virtual machine. So I think we can pause it real quickly here, so we can go there and we logged in, okay, and then we open the server manager, and then we will open the computer name, so here we need to go to the network connection setting. Here we can see there is no internet access, okay, and the details here is our gateway, but to have internet access, okay, you need to have your DNS to be the same as the gateway, or to add any public DNS. So here I will add the public DNS of Google, or if you need to add the gateway as your DNS, okay. So here I will check after adding. Here I will go to the properties, okay, and then properties, and then we will add the DNS to be 8888. This is Google public DNS, or you can add the default gateway as a DNS, but anyway this will work. So we will change this setting after or before promoting this server to be a domain controller. We will change the preferred DNS, or we will remove the preferred DNS, and then we will begin installing the domain controller. And after installing the domain controller, we will correct the issue of the preferred DNS. Here you can see that there is a third connection. If we can go a little bit further here, you can see that there is a third connection. Just a moment here. So here we can see that there is 2 network connections for every network card, and this is the third network connection that contains both network cards, and they will be acted as one, and the IP will be added as one here for the 2. So here when we open this the edge, we can see that we have internet access. Here we will change the name of the PC and then tell him to change and then we'll change the name. So this is the name of the server, and by doing this we have prepared this server after that to add to it the Active Directory domain services and then promote it to be a domain controller. Now we need to restart the server after changing the name, so we will do this restart. Then you have restarted again, okay, and then we can see that we can access the server, okay. And I have a problem with the audio, so I'll begin checking the audio for the server or the virtual machine. I tell him open sound operating system, and then we can see that I will tell him to troubleshoot, okay, and he will begin troubleshooting the problem, and he will solve the problem of the device or the device sound device, and it will be solved. Okay, and one of the things in the changing of Windows Server 2022, when you right click this PC and tell him properties, it will get you to a different menu set. It will not get you to the old menu of the computer name and so on. So I will show you all what I mean by this. So for example, if we know that when we make right click here, okay, and tell him properties, it will get us to this window. As for Windows Server 2022, it will not get you there, it will get you to another place. I will show you all. This is one of the differences or the things that changes in this option. So we will tell him now there, and then we will right click and properties. Here you can see it will get you to a completely different menu or to a completely different window, but it contains the device specs, the name of the PC, the processor, the RAM, the device ID, the product ID, the system, and a lot of things. And here we can rename this PC, so we can change the name of this PC from here or from the advanced setting or from the local server in the server manager. But you can do this also from right click this PC, properties, and rename this PC. So you can do this from 2 ways, okay. So this is one of the changes. So what we'll do now, this is one of the changes, and then I will shut down this server, okay, and I think this is it. I will install the I will install the Windows Admin Center, but this will be for another app. So I hope this video is informative to you all, and would like to thank you all for viewing. In the upcoming video, we will begin installing the Active Directory domain services and promote the server to be a domain controller. Thank you so much.